Today is Tuesday, January 15th, 2019. My name is Edna Sussman. I'm a reference librarian here at the Half Hollow Hills Community Library in Dix Hills, New York. We're interviewing Pasquale Villante, a Korean Army veteran, as part of our Veterans Testimonial Project and in collaboration with the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Thank you so much, Pat, for your service and for being here and participating in our project. Pat, where and when were you born?
I was born in New York City, 1941, month of September.
And who were your parents, their names, and what did they do?
My mom was Philomena Villante. She was a housewife. My father was Nicholas Villante, and he was a mechanic, worked for the Manhattan and Bronx transit system in the city for many years, diesel mechanic.
Mm-hmm. Were they born here?
My mother and father were both born in New York State. My grandmothers on my father's side and mother's side were born in Italy.
Do you speak Italian?
Unfortunately, I don't.
So who are your siblings, their names and genders?
I have an older brother, Edward, who is 84 years old. I have an older sister, Teresa, who is 81. And I had a younger brother, Nicholas, who passed away about 5 years ago.
Oh, sorry. Were any of them in the... Sorry, four of you.
Yes.
Were any of them in the military?
My brother Eddie was in the service, and he actually served in Korea also. In 1950, the war was over 55, and 56 also for 1 year.
So he was gone from there by the time you got there?
Yes.
So what were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I graduated Martin Van Buren High School in 1959, and at that point I hadn't made up my mind whether or not I was going to college or not, and I decided to go into the service, volunteer for my draft. So the day after my birthday, I was 18 years old, and I went down to the draft board, and they were drafting at that time, and I had my draft, what they called, pushed up. So the next roster that came down, your name would be on that roster.
Now, why did you enlist in the Army?
Well,
why did you pick that?
I know my brother was in there also, and I sort of was leaning in that sort of direction. The fact that he went through with it, I thought I would do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So what happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training? What was that all like? And where was it?
Big change from living in the city, believe me. I was raised basically playing stickball most of my life in Lower Manhattan. And as I said, after 18, I decided to go in. He took me down to Whitehall Street, my brother, and I was inducted at Whitehall Street. And from there, I was shipped to Fort Dix, New Jersey, for processing, basic haircuts and so forth, clothing and so forth, just waiting for additional orders to where we would take our basic training.
So where did you go after that then?
We were, believe it or not, all of us, 50 of us, from New York. We shipped out to Topeka, Kansas. Fort Riley, Kansas, and I had no idea where Fort Riley, Kansas was on a map. And lo and behold, it's dead center. The nearest town was a town called Manhattan, Kansas.
Oh, that's funny.
And we took basic out there for eight weeks.
8 weeks. What was your basic like? What did you learn there?
We learned discipline, of course, getting up in the morning, a lot of teamwork because you're working together, you're working with 50 guys in a company. The nice part about Fort Riley, Kansas, it was a modern barracks. We had cinder block barracks. We had tile floors, so it was a big difference from Fort Dix, New Jersey, where you had the old World War II barracks to contend with.
How long were you at Fort Dix?
Fort Dix was only about 10 days just processing before they decided to ship you to where your basic training was. So my basic training was 8 weeks, and that was in Kansas.
Kansas. Do you remember any of your instructors? What were they like?
I remember a drill instructor, Sergeant Hanna. crew cut, typical DI, muscular guy,
What's DI?
drill instructor.
Oh,
And he treated us fairly. He really did, and he kept us on the ball. And as a matter of fact, our group was voted the outstanding barracks for the 8 weeks over there because they had inspections every week,
Wow.
and we sort of came out on top on that. But
good job.
he
Nice.
he did a good job with us.
Did you receive any specialized training?
Well, the specialized training happened after basic. You go for what they call your specialized training school, and I was shipped to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I was classified as an MOS, which is your military occupational specialty, which was 710 at that time. It probably still is. And the title was clerk typist. So for the next 8 weeks at Fort Riley, Kansas, we went to typing school. Almost like a day's work. We'd been there at 9 o'clock. We were out at 5, and 8 hours a day, with going over different forms that the Army would use if you worked in the office as a company clerk and so forth. And the instructor had told us that when you leave here, you'll be typing 35 words a minute, which,
Oh.
everybody says, oh, yes, of course. And
Did you?
yes, I certainly did.
Wow.
And I can recall the instructor was funny because he had a way of, we had manual typewriters, of course, back then, and he would play a song called Canadian Sunset by Hugo Winterhall. I don't know if you remember the song, but
No.
it's a, and he would use that song for rhythm. And he would play that over and over again, and we would be typing, for bop, 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 bop,
That's cute. And
but
it
that
worked.
song stays. Every time I hear it, I think
Yeah.
I think of Fort Knox, Kentucky.
But it worked.
It
maybe.
worked. It worked with the people. So that was 8 weeks. 8 weeks of training, and
Now, did you get to pick what specialized training, or
the
why did that
specialized
happen?
training, believe it or not, on my aptitude test that we took at Fort Dix, New Jersey, I apparently scored the highest in the clerical area. They rated you with different parts of the different types of tests that
Oh,
they
I
took
see.
over there. So when they told us why, they said your rating was the highest at that point. So apparently they did follow through with what the results of the testing was.
You didn't request any particular assignment or
No, I did not.
specialization or anything?
No.
How was it adapting to military life? You know, the food and barracks and social life?
The food you never get used to.
Really?
And maybe the second year when later on in my career in the Army, the food gets to change because you're stationed there and they treat you a lot differently. You're there for a long period of time. But you adapt. You have to adapt. Getting up early, the routine, and so forth. But you manage.
So after the specialized training, then where did you go?
We had the second 8 weeks was at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and we were waiting for orders after your specialized training, and I was assigned to what they call the Combat Development Group within Fort Knox, Kentucky. So I remained there, and when I started to work there, we were told I needed a security clearance. So I waited about, a friend of mine, both of us were on the same job, working for the same people, the same government. We
same
waited about
department?
2 weeks for the security clearance to go through.
2 weeks.
So they had nothing to do to us, and all we did was paint. We painted a conference room over and one side to the other, just to
Okay.
keep us occupied
Yeah,
there. And the clearance finally came through, and we worked at this group of people where the Army developed new weapons. And we would show slides to officers that came in to view these new weapons and so forth, and we would type up certain reports, after the presentation and so forth. And it was good duty.
So I guess that's why it
enjoyed
was classified.
Yes, exactly right.
Weaponry and things like that.
Brand new weapons that weren't even in use yet at the time, that were down the road and so forth. And
So you weren't allowed to tell your folks or write to them about what you were doing?
Right, I just told them what, the area that I was in, but we didn't discuss the type of weapons that were being classified at that point.
So you, then after Kentucky,
Well, we were in
How long were
Kentucky
you
for
there?
about 8 months,
oh, wow.
and I was drafted. The fact that I volunteered for my draft, the draft period was 2 years at that time, and I had about 14 months left of my 2-year enlistment.
You started in 59?
59,
Okay.
and in order, every month, they would have a list of, a roster would come down for people who qualified for overseas duty. So you needed at least 14 months of service left, because they figured a month to get there, a year service, and a year back. So if you stayed in the States over 15, 17 months, you weren't going anywhere,
I see.
because they didn't have the time to get you back and forth. So I had about 14 months left. And the roster came down, and sure enough, my name happened to be on the list.
Were you glad?
So beginning, I wasn't. I was disappointed. They convinced me. They says, "Look, it'll be a good experience. You get a lot out of it, and the time would go a lot faster, and so forth." And and they gave me a 72-hour leave. Never forget that. We flew home, had my last meal of lasagna that my mother made, of course. Excuse me.
Want some more water? Okay.
And that night, my father, excuse me.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. Drove me to Idlewild Airport, which was Kennedy Airport, but Kennedy Airport now, and we had a flight out of JFK to Chicago. I'll never forget the plane too. It was a TWA Super Constellation.
Wow.
It was a 4-engine plane, tremendous. At that time, it was a giant of an airplane. We stopped at Chicago. The next morning, we flew into San Francisco for processing again, waiting for overseas duty. Next day, we boarded a ship. If I'm not mistaken, the ship was the USS Barrett, destined for Korea, which was 30 days on the ship.
Wow, that's a long time to be on a ship
It
for.
was quite a haul.
It was a military ship, right?
It was-
So big, must have been big.
It was huge. It was huge. Maybe in that time it was, but it was a military transport service vehicles that they
I see.
used. And Oakland was the point of debarkation.
I see.
Embarkation. And we left on there, and that's an experience, because you're below the ship. You're sleeping 3 high, and everybody had a job on there. Everybody had to pick something out, because they didn't want you just walking around for 30 days on a ship. And a buddy of mine suggested, let's be a chef's helper, a cook chef's helper there. And the reason being is you only worked the morning hours, which was like 5 until 8 or 9 o'clock. You had the whole day to yourself.
But you'd get up so early.
That was the one disadvantage, was getting up, but you had the whole day afterwards. So it was a nice feeling that you're on your own. And but it was a good. We helped. There were Filipino cooks on ship, and we just helped out. Breaking eggs in the morning, because they used fresh eggs back then, and they were scrambled. And peeling onions, I remember. They had us peeling onions under the water so our eyes wouldn't tear. Potatoes, they had their own potato peeler there. We didn't get involved in that. But it kept you busy for the
Right.
couple hours in the morning.
And you got to eat it, of
And
course.
we had nice breakfast in the morning, because the Filipino cooks took excellent care of us. We were helping them out.
Nice. So you didn't actually cook the food?
No,
You prepared
we were
it.
just basically helping them out.
Yeah. So you did that for the 30 days?
Yes, yes.
So when you arrived, where did you arrive then after the 30 days?
We stopped prior to getting into Korea, we stopped in Formosa, which is now Taiwan. We picked up some additional civilians. They treated us to a wonderful dinner at the Grand Hotel, which is still there in Taiwan.
Really?
And from there, back to the ship, and I think the next day or 2 days later, we were in, I'm trying to think of the town in Korea where they landed over there.
Seoul?
Near Seoul, but it was the area where MacArthur made his landing in 1950. That's basically the part of most of the ships when they land over there. And from there, we went into processing again with winter uniforms, the hat, the Mickey Mouse boots, which were huge boots that they gave us over there. And we waited for an assignment for the following year.
When was that? What time of the year?
It had to be September. It had to be November of 1960, I would say.
So it was cold?
Year.
You said Korea's cold.
It was just beginning to get cold at that point. Yeah, just prior to the winter really setting in.
So so the Korean War had kind of toned down by then?
The Korean War was over in 1953, although the war seems to go on, or it's almost like a Cold War over there. Just to give you a little background of Korea, it's separated out the 38th parallel, which divides North and South Korea. The DMZ is approximately maybe about 3 miles wide, and it runs across the entire peninsula. The middle of that was what they call the military demarcation line that separated the actual north and south.
Did they have it marked off? I mean, so
yes, they actually had, they have a fence on both sides, but there was a line basically in the center of that which separated the two Koreas. The South Koreans and the American troops patrol the southern end of it. They would actually walk along there, and the South Korean troops would walk on, they had their own sector, of course, and they would monitor that end, and the North Koreans did the same thing. So it was a constant 24-hour patrol, just looking for violations and so forth, because according to the agreement, certain weapons were not allowed into the zone. So if you walked in with an automatic weapon, it was a no-no.
What would happen? Did anybody do that?
There was an incident I'm going to point out later on that these incidents were called in, any violation or any activity were called into the G2 section, which is where I wound up working in the Army. And we sat there with earphones, and we would take these reports that would come in. We would log them, we would put the coordinates down, and log in the type of activity that actually happened.
How did you get the reports from whom? From where?
They had observation posts, OPs, located along the southern DMZ. These were guys, 2 or 3 in a booth with a little potbelly stove there to keep them warm in the winter. And they had these binoculars, these big observation equipment there. They would pick up any movement whatsoever. And anything they saw would be called into the G2 section, which is what myself and a group of guys would take down information. We did that once a week. We would call in, everybody had a chance to work in that department. They called it a tactical operations center, where these calls would come in. At the end of the week, you would consolidate all the activity, compare it to the prior year to get a feeling as to whether or not there was an increase in activity, and then year to year they would just work that. Was accumulated total of figures that we would analyze.
So if there was activity, what would happen?
They would, if there was a violation, they had meetings at Panmunjom. The generals would call a meeting, the North Koreans would come in, and the North Koreans would sit on one side, the Americans would sit on the other, and there was a line across the desk, and there was a North Korean flag here, and they would discuss it. We did this, you did that, and they did this, and they would walk away and nothing would happen. But there was one incident I just have to talk about.
Good.
There was an incident where a Russian tank was located within the northern part of the DMZ, which is a direct violation, a big violation. And it was a heavy-duty tank. It was a modern, at that time, it was considered a modern Russian tank. It was a T-34. It's a heavy-duty. And they also have, the Americans had a plane. It was a Piper Cub that would fly along the DMZ every morning. If there was no activity, they would just call us in and say no activity. They called it Bird Dog. We'd call in no activity and so forth. And but this time they picked up the tank in there, and it was camouflaged. Of course, they had nets over it and so forth, but it was clear as day when we saw the pictures. And they had a meeting the next week, and I understand the response from the North Korean was that that's not our tank, and then a tank doesn't just fly in there, and eventually a week later, the tank was removed, and
Well, was there a Russian driving it?
They don't know who was driving it. We don't really know. It was just stationary. It was just parked there.
Oh.
It was just parked, camouflaged.
How did it get there?
Just antagonizing. One would antagonize the other, and they did something. Well, now we'll counter and do something else.
Did that? You think that? How long did that kind of thing go on? Do you know?
That was a major event, but there were small events where they would have North Koreans sometimes come over to try to get information. They would come over the river from the south into the north, and they would catch you. You had these troops over there monitoring the place, and they would question, and so the spying went on. Probably both sides. I don't know, but I know definitely from the north. You had people coming over and
From the north into the south.
Into the south. That's trying to find out what's going on. Like the modern
CIA
system here.
But when they kind of came over, they weren't supposed to be
No,
there. So
they
were they then? Did we arrest them or what?
They
happened?
would arrest them, and they probably never went back.
You think they
either
wanted to come over and stay over?
I don't know. I don't know what the.
Wow.
But we do have pictures of them coming over with weapons. And if they came over with weapons, I don't think they really wanted to come over on their own.
Oh,
so
I
they
see.
were sent over as probably spies to see what was going on.
Well, that's really. How did you know? I mean, I guess you could tell they were watched where they were coming from, but South Korean, North Korean, they all kind of. How do you know which is which?
Uniforms were one thing,
Oh.
although if they came over as a spy, they would probably have their own uniform, different. They would maybe even dress up as a South Korean.
Not as a
and come
soldier.
over. No, no.
That's very interesting. So what were your duties generally? How long were you over there?
In Korea, I was stationed for 12 months, and part of that year that I worked there was working in that department where I would take in the information from the observation post that were called in on a daily basis. And other than that, it was typing weekly intelligence reports. Anything of an intelligence nature that was classified, we would type up for the officers to make presentations to meetings that were
reporting
coming.
back to the higher ups.
Right, exactly right. We had a major general in charge, and I'm sure that information went to the lieutenant and eventually to the commander of the 8th Army down there.
How many men do you think were stationed with you there?
In the G2 section, we had maybe about 15 people within that barracks that we slept in. About 15 people, I would say.
What kind of friendships and camaraderie did you form there?
Most of the guys were from myself being from New York, we didn't have anyone from New York. The closest guy was from Chicago.
Really?
So we got to meet a lot of different guys from different countries. Their lifestyle was a lot different than myself.
Different countries?
Well, not countries,
states.
different states.
States, okay.
And but it was interesting. They were a nice group of guys.
Nice group.
I'm sorry I never really kept up with the friendship later on it, but.
So there was no real combat going on, but there's always a danger.
There was the danger, exactly right. There was always the danger of them coming over there and creating havoc over there with soldiers who actually manned that zone.
Yeah.
We were located north of Seoul, our company, and the company that actually monitored the DMZ was a little further north than where we were. So those were the guys that really put in the time and 12 hours a day where they actually were involved with that day-to-day contact with the North Koreans.
Were you able to stay in touch with family and friends at all?
Wrote to my parents on a regular basis. I made one phone call. Never forget that, too. I went into Seoul, And the cost at that time was $3 a minute or something
Wow.
to that effect. And
That
I
was a lot
talking-
then.
I was calling, and it sounded like my mother was underwater because the calls were, the cables were probably, I don't know where they were, but you'd say something and you'd wait 10 seconds for her to respond. So she got the message. So it was,
That's
but it was
hard.
nice to hear her voice
Yeah,
after
yeah. I bet.
about 6 months.
Were you writing letters too?
We wrote to my parents on a regular basis. I had friends still at home that were still in school. So I did keep in touch with them, and I still do.
Oh,
I have
that's
friends
good.
now friends who live out in the island. I know them for 50 years.
Oh,
I
that's
still
nice.
keep in touch.
What about, do you have time for off-duty recreation and things like that? What did you do?
After 3 months in Korea, or 6 months or so, they give you what they call R&R, which is rest and recuperation. And a few of us decided, let's go to Japan. Where do we go? And we're kicking back different ports of Korea, and we decided on Hiroshima. And took a boat from Busan, which is the tip of Korea, into a town called Moji, Japan, which was a shipping point.
How long was that, you think?
Overnight.
Oh.
It was an LST boat that took us, actually that boat took supplies from Japan into Korea on a regular basis.
It was a military ship?
It was a military ship also. And from Moji, we took the train from Moji into Hiroshima. We spent a week down there, which was a wonderful experience.
Why is that?
Just to look at a country that developed after being totally destroyed after the Second World War. It was something to see.
Did you see a lot of the destruction still then, or no?
There's what they call an atomic dome over there. That is the remains of the actual bombing actually it was ground zero of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. The town back then, everything was peace-oriented. There was a peace boulevard, there were peace cigarettes. They had a peace museum there, was something to see. Just amazing, the pictures that they had there. And the people were wonderful to us. They treated us,
Nice.
really fine.
What kind of place did you stay in?
We stayed in of course, a Japanese-style hotel, and we walked in, got our first room we had, and we were looking around for beds. And of course, there were no beds around, and a woman come in and says, "Your beds are over there." And we found out there were rolls.
Rolls?
Rolls of a mattress rolls up for them, and at night they would roll the mattress out on the floor, and for 4 or 5 nights we slept on the floor.
Was it like a
Uncomfortable.
mat?
It was a mat. It was
thick enough to lie on?
Right, a heavy-duty mattress, sort
Okay.
of. Wasn't even a mattress because it didn't have a spring in there.
Right.
But it was a thick area there where we slept on. It was an experience.
I bet.
Food was good.
Was
They
good?
treated us well.
So there's no feeling you're an American soldier. They were nice.
I didn't feel that over there. No, I didn't feel that at all. I was surprised, actually. I thought we would have problems. At that time, the currency rate was 360 yen to the dollar. And we would go into a beer hall, and we would have rice, a steak, and a pitcher of beer, not a pitcher, a mug of beer for 1,000 yen, which was the equivalent of $3.
Wow.
So
That's pretty
that was
good.
6 days. We were in Korea. We were in that beer hall having our steak and rice.
Nice.
And
What about the feeling in Korea with, well, I guess the South Koreans? They were happy you were there.
they were very happy, and they were. The poverty in that country was unreal. The villages nearby, we would visit certain areas in South Korea, and how they survived was something to be seen. It really was amazing, and they were happy. They were a happy bunch. They had rough winters. Their villages were hut, almost built like straw tops on there. The heating came from the floor. I don't know how they managed to do that,
Yeah.
but the heat came under the ground there. And they survived. They managed to cope with whatever they had. And the things that they did, I'll never forget, they were the first ones. I remember we would throw away tires the Army would throw away tires, and they came up with the way of making sandals out of them. And this is going back 30, 50 years ago.
Amazing.
Where they would create their own sandal from the tire itself, from the tread, and
Wow.
the
That's
top
pretty
of the
interesting.
villages, they would take beer cans, they would flatten the beer cans out and put them on top of the roof as an insulation.
Protection.
Yes, as an insulation, just put them down. And
That's pretty
so
smart.
they were really ingenious with certain
Ingenious,
things
yeah.
that they did over there. And
You think they felt safer because Americans were over there?
yes, they certainly did.
Hmm.
I mean, they thanked us. We were there. I mean, they were happy that we were there.
Really?
And again, a lot of them actually worked for the government too. So we were almost supporting some of them. They worked within the compounds. They were.
You mean for our government?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, the South Koreans.
Okay.
Would come in and they would work in the mess halls. They would clean up sometimes. So they had jobs. And
You had help in the barracks? You had some?
we all had houseboys.
Right.
Houseboys would basically wash your clothing, shine your shoes, and clean your fatigues. And they had not a strange way, but it was to me anyway, that they would use rice. They would heat the rice up and create starch. And they would press your fatigues with the starch from the rice. And when they got through, your fatigues were flat as like a pancake from all the starch. You had to spread them apart.
Well, that's funny.
But
Now, who
they
paid them? Did you have to pay them?
we paid them, and I wasn't a smoker. I'm still not a smoker. And they were accepting cartons of cigarettes in place of money.
Oh,
And only knows what they did with the cigarettes. But
Yeah. Wow.
that wasn't my concern.
but the Army
But
paid them otherwise, or not?
The Army, I don't recall. I don't recall the setup on that, but I know for the work that they did for us,
Oh, okay.
we would give them as a nice gesture.
I see.
uh,
So, when did you return home and how?
My year was up in Korea at the end of 1960, and we were set to come home, and lo and behold, they had what they called the Berlin crisis occurred in Germany. The wall went up, and everybody got extended for for 3 months, 90 days. The nice part, we were called in to say we have bad news and we have good news, and the bad news is that everyone is going to be extended for 90 days in Korea. He says the good news is that the people who were supposed to leave this month will be shipped out because a ship was on his way over to South Korea at the time.
Oh.
So we were part of that group.
Oh, you could leave.
So we were able to leave, and we were the last boat to leave Korea for 90 days. However, we were still extended for 90 days.
Oh.
So I wound up spending my last 90 days in Fort Dix, New Jersey, in a photo lab group.
What did you do there?
Again, it was typing up captions on the back of a photograph. When someone had meetings, a general had a meeting, would represent maybe 5 or 6 different offices, and we would type in the offices that were in attendance and what they did and so forth.
Oh, documenting. Yeah.
Right, the photographs that were
Oh,
taken.
nice.
It was interesting. It was
Yeah.
90 days, and
Yeah, and then you were sent home?
and then I was finally discharged. I was on what they call a 6-year reserve active duty.
Was that optional, or you?
No, that was required. It was
Oh, it was.
2 back then, and however, I wasn't called for any active reserve actors. I was on call, but I wasn't called on an annual basis.
Did
But
you
my
have
name
to
was-
serve every month, a weekend?
I didn't have to do that, no.
Oh, okay. So you're just on call if they needed?
Exactly.
Okay. So how were you received by your family and community once you got home?
Well, you're away a year. It's a great experience. It's a great time coming home. You're back to your friends. You're back to doing what you want to do in life, and it just was a good experience for me. I got a lot out of it. I got to see a lot of the world.
Did you travel
Part of it.
other than to Japan, other places?
While we were there, or now?
No, when you were in Korea.
No, we just traveled to Japan with the 2 points. One was Tokyo, was the second R&R, and the first one, as I pointed out before, was Hiroshima.
So how was it adjusting to civilian life, and what did you end up doing when you got home?
I got back, and then I had to do something with my life. What do we do? I decided to, I had a friend of mine who worked for he was an air freight carrier, forwarder, and he had a lot of contacts with the transportation business in the city. And he got me an interview with a company called Sterling Drug, who's no longer around, a pharmaceutical company, makers of Bayer aspirin.
Oh,
You may know them,
right.
the Bayer people.
Sure.
That was part of Sterling. That was a division of Sterling. And I worked with them, and I attended a what they call a traffic academy of school of transportation, the shipments of products from point A to point B, getting involved with the ICC regulations, which at that time controlled the transportation industry before it was deregulated. And I attended that school, and I wound up becoming a fleet manager for Sterling Drug.
Oh, wow.
They had a fleet of trucks operating out of Secaucus, New Jersey, and we operated about 1 million miles a year. They were union drivers, and I basically scheduled them, handled their payroll. We had labor negotiations every 3 years with them. It was an interesting job.
You liked it?
I really enjoyed it.
How long were you there?
I was there a little over 20 years.
Wow.
And Sterling was bought out by another company who's no longer around, Eastman Kodak.
Oh, you're kidding?
Yes, Kodak bought them out, and after Kodak bought them out, they started to sell off different divisions of Sterling, and I was part of the Sterling group. And eventually, what happens is when they start selling off, there's nothing left, and I left the company, and I worked for Samsung Electronics, doing import-export. Again, it was transportation, shipping containers from Korea. And that was an interesting thing because the company I worked for, Samsung, was Korean.
Oh, yeah.
And I got a kick out of talking to them and showing them different pictures of Korea.
They must have enjoyed them.
They really was. It was an
Yeah.
experience working with them. And I worked with them. They were in Jersey, Saddlebrook, New Jersey. I was with them about 7, 8 years, and my last part of my career was with a utility company. I worked for Keyspan. They started off at Brooklyn Union. They merged with Keyspan, and then Keyspan merged with another company. But I retired with them after about 7, 8 years. And,
Wow.
so I had a
Long
sort of a mixed career here.
Yeah, nice.
But
And in between, you started a family and met your wife and started a family.
with my wife, I'm married 50 years this past May.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I have 2 daughters, Gina and Nicole. I have 5 grandchildren.
Wow, nice.
Ellie is 20, and she's a senior at, not a senior, she's a junior at Geneseo
Oh, yeah.
SUNY School. Her
This is a
brother-
granddaughter.
That's my granddaughter.
Yeah.
Correct. And Dean, who's a senior at Comac High School, is on the track team, a good athlete.
Great.
And on my daughter's side, I have I have a set of twins who are like 7 years old.
Did they run in your family? Twins?
My brother had twins.
Really?
My brother's daughter had the twins. I shouldn't say that, my brother's daughter. But on my father's side, my aunt also had twins on that side. So, I think on the Valenti side, there might be some connection there somewhere along the lines.
Yeah.
And I have Gina. Gina is the older daughter. She's out in Comac. And she teaches as a part sub out in the island here. I forget the school. And the other daughter is a house. She takes care of the twins and the older one. She's still a
Very
housewife
nice.
out there.
Very nice. You said you weren't able to remain in contact with any fellow veterans?
I haven't, no, and I lost that, and I'm sorry now when I think about the experiences that I had.
Yeah.
So
Or veterans organizations? Are you a member of any?
no, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not.
So how do you think your military experiences affected your life? Or
Well-
what are some life lessons you might have learned from the military?
You learn at that age. Don't forget, I was 19 at the time. I was 18 when I went in, and you learn to work with groups of people. and you learn discipline, you learn to follow orders, you learn you can't be doing things you want to do because there's 50 guys doing things a lot differently than you, so you sort of blend in, you work with them, and you adjust. And I think it helps you later on in life.
Really?
I think it's part of growing up, in my case anyway.
How do you think your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
I don't know. I'm a history buff. I love to read history stories, generals. I can go from MacArthur all the way down to Patton, and I enjoy watching, keeping up to date with the military. So it stayed with me over the years. In terms of a position, I don't want to put my position in there, but as far as the government itself and the military, I still keep up with the times and the development and what's new with the Army and so forth. And
Did any of your kids join the military?
my brother Eddie was drafted in 1955, which was right after the Korean War. So he spent 2 years a year in Korea also.
Well, what about your own children? They didn't join the military?
No, well, there were 2 girls. No, they didn't join the service. Both went to, Sheena went to Queens College, and my youngest daughter went to FIT in the city and got involved with that line of work, you know.
Is there anything we haven't covered, or anything you can think of you'd like to share that we haven't talked about?
Well, I think you covered the 2 years here. Just the parts of, we covered Hiroshima on my first R&R. The second R&R was Tokyo, and again, here's a city that was bombed out completely during the Second World War. And when we got there in 1960, it was like almost like Times Square at times.
Really?
I tell you,
You couldn't tell?
You could not tell. Wow. They had their Fifth Avenue was called the Ginza, and I have moving pictures of that area lit up at night, and the neon lights were unbelievable. It was to see that in a town like Tokyo after so many years after the bombing and something was a sight to be seen.
Amazing. Wow.
And we had a nice weekend there, enjoyed it. We got to see different parts of Tokyo. We went up to, there was a place called Lake Hakone, was a resort area there. We spent some time there. They took us to some areas in Tokyo where they had a tea ceremony. We got involved in that, and then you get to see the customs of different countries. And
did you learn any foreign languages while you were?
Unfortunately, I didn't.
Korean or Japanese? No.
I do know one word in Korean, and that's yoboseo.
Oh, what does that mean?
And every time it's hello, almost.
How do you say it?
And yoboseo.
Yoboseo.
And every time I see someone who's Korean, that's the first thing I'll say, and and they'll rattle on and so forth. And
It's funny. That's cute.
but
So, what message do you think you'd like to leave for future generations who might view this video?
well, I'd like to say it's my experience alone in the service to me was worthwhile. I enjoyed serving my country. I got a lot out of it. I think if people have the opportunity to do so, they should decide. I think it's a good decision to make. At least in my case, it was. And I leave it up to the individual. I really do. But in my case, I thought it was a worthwhile experience.
It was a good thing for you.
In my case, definitely.
Well, thank you very much, Pat. I really appreciate you sharing this with us, and for your service especially. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you taking the time and spending it with me, and
It's an
thank
honor.
you again.
It's an honor for us. Thank you.
At one point,